31 years of handing everything I had to the people I love, and the first time I bought something with my own name on it, my son told me I was stealing from him. My name is Raymond Dalquist. Everybody's called me Ray since the second grade. I'm 71 years old, and I live in Duluth, Minnesota, up on the hill in Piedmont Heights, in a gray house with a red door that I painted myself in 1994 and have repainted 6 times since. I worked 41 years as a pipe fitter, the last 19 of them running my own mechanical contracting outfit with 4 trucks and 11 men on the payroll. I've had my hands inside the guts of half the hospitals and school boilers in St. Louis County. My knees are shot. My right shoulder tells me when it's going to snow. I've never been a man who spent money on himself. My wife, Dorothy Dot, everybody calls her Dot, will tell you that I wore the same brown Carhartt coat from 1997 until the sleeve came apart at the elbow in 2019, and that when it did, I stitched it and wore it 2 more winters. I drove work trucks. I ate lunch out of a cooler. I bought my coffee in a can, not a cup. What my children never understood was that a man who doesn't spend isn't the same thing as a man who doesn't have. Every job I bid clean. Every winter I worked a double when the pipes froze all over this city. Every dollar I didn't spend on myself went somewhere. It went into an account. It went into index funds, a fellow from Superior set up for me in 1988, and I never touched. 31 years of not buying things adds up to something. It adds up to a great deal more than my kids ever guessed, because I never once let them see it. That's who Ray Dalquist was. I turned 71 in October. Dot made her pot roast and her sour cream raisin pie, which she makes twice a year, and not one time more. Marcus called from the car between showings, 4 minutes. Renee texted a cake emoji and a heart. That's fine. They're grown. They're busy. I understand busy. What nobody in that house knew was that 11 days earlier, I had driven down to a dealership in Hermantown and put $61,000, cash, on a 34-foot fifth-wheel travel trailer. Slate blue, 2 slide-outs, a real bed, not a fold-down, a little kitchen with a window over the sink so Dot could look out at wherever we happened to be parked that morning. I want you to understand what that trailer was, friends. In 1989, my wife stood in this kitchen with a road atlas open on the counter and a yellow highlighter in her hand, and she traced a line from Duluth down through the Badlands and Yellowstone and out to the Oregon coast, and she said, "Someday." And I said, "Someday." And then Marcus needed braces, and then the truck threw a rod, and then Renee needed her tonsils out, and then, for 31 years. That trailer wasn't a toy. It was a promise I was finally 71 years old enough to keep. They delivered it on a Tuesday. I parked it in the side yard and I sat in it alone for about 20 minutes before I went in and got Dot. I sat at that little dinette and I put my hands flat on the table and I looked out the window at my own driveway and I felt something I hadn't felt since I was maybe 35 years old. I felt like a man who had gotten somewhere. Not a father. Not a boss. Not a checkbook with legs. Just Ray. I should have known that feeling had a short shelf life. Now before I take you any further into this, do me a favor, hit that like button, and drop me a comment down below telling me where in this world you're listening from. I read every one of them. Stay with me, friends, because this story goes places I promise you're not expecting. Renee came by on a Thursday. She's 34. She does interior styling, which as near as I can tell means she arranges other people's furniture and photographs it. She didn't call ahead. She never calls ahead. I heard her Lexus in the driveway and I watched from the kitchen window as she stopped dead about 10 feet short of the trailer and just sat there with the engine running. A full minute, maybe more. I went out on the step with my coffee. "Morning, sweetheart." She got out slow. She didn't look at me once. She walked the whole length of that trailer with her arms crossed like she was inspecting a crime scene, and then she turned around. "Dad, what is this?" "That's a fifth wheel. Your mother and I are going west in the spring." "Since when?" "Since 1989. She didn't laugh. She put 2 fingers against her forehead the way she's done since she was 9 years old and something wasn't going her way. "How much?" I took a drink of my coffee. I made her wait for it. 61,000. The sound she made wasn't a word. It was air coming out of a person who has just been told something they intend to do something about. She was on her phone before she reached her car door. She was dialing before she got to the stop sign at the end of my street. I knew exactly who she was calling. They came the next afternoon, all three of them. Marcus, my son, 39, real estate, and his wife's brother, no. Let me be honest with you. I'll say it plain. Renee brought Tyler, her husband, 28 years old. And in the 6 years he's been married to my daughter, I have never once known him to hold a job through a full winter. They didn't call ahead either. When my kids show up together, unannounced, it means they've already had the meeting. I've known that since Marcus was 17. Dot was at the counter cutting apples. She looked at me when we heard the doors. Her face said, "Be kind." My face said, "I know exactly what walked up my steps." We sat in the front room. Marcus took the middle of the couch. Renee took the wingback by the window. Tyler stood by the door, with his hands in his pockets, like a man waiting for a bus. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. He's got a way of doing that, like he's about to explain something complicated to somebody slow. "Dad, we need to talk about the trailer." I figured. $61,000. $61,200 with the hitch. He didn't like that. "Dad, do you understand how that looks? At your age? You're 71. You should be preserving what you have. Not," he made a motion with his hand, like flicking water off it, "not burning it." There it was. "That's not your money to burn, Dad." He said it just about that way, and I've had 11 months to think about it since, and I still hear it in my sleep. Renee picked it up from there, smooth as a relay. "We're worried about you. Both of you. What happens if you need long-term care? What happens if Mom needs care? Every dollar you spend now is a dollar that isn't there when it matters." When it matters to who? Nobody answered that one right away. Dot came in from the kitchen with a plate of the apples she'd been cutting. "Can I get anybody?" "Mom." Marcus didn't even turn his head. "We're in the middle of something." And that, friends, right there, is the moment this story actually starts. Because I watched my wife of 48 years stand in the doorway of her own house holding a plate of apples she'd cut for those three, and I watched her decide not to say anything, and I watched the color come up her neck the way it does. I put my cup down on the side table. Not hard, but I put it down. "Marcus, Dad, you're going to turn your head and look at your mother, and you're going to thank her for the apples." The room went absolutely still. Tyler suddenly found something fascinating about his shoes. Marcus turned. His jaw was working. "Thanks, Mom." "You're welcome, honey," Dot said, and her voice was steady, but it wasn't right. And she set that plate down and went back to the kitchen, and nobody touched a single slice of that apple the entire time they were in my house. Renee cleared her throat and started up again like nothing had happened. "Dad, we're not trying to control you. That's good. We just think you're being careless with something that isn't only yours." "Say more about that." She looked at Marcus. He nodded at her. "Go ahead. You've always said you were building something for this family. That's what you said. That's what we grew up hearing. And now you're 71 and you're spending it on a camper. And we're going to end up with nothing. There it is. That's the whole thing, right there, in 11 words from my only daughter." I sat back in my chair. I looked at the ceiling for a second. Then I looked at the three of them. And I want you to hear how I handled it. Because it's the most important decision I made in my whole life. "You know something," I said. "You might be right." Marcus blinked. Okay. Good. Your mother's right that I've worked hard. But you're right that I've gotten loose with things. I've let a lot of money run out of this house without counting it. I hear you. I'll cut back." You could see the relief come off all three of them like heat off a road. They stayed for supper. They laughed. Tyler told a long story about a fishing trip he took in June. Marcus hugged me at the door and said, "We just love you, Dad." And I said, "I know it, son," and I meant something different by it than he heard. They drove off feeling like fine, responsible children who had done a hard thing for their father's own good. Dot stood at the window and watched the taillights go down the hill. Then she turned around and looked at me for a long time. "Ray, I'm fine." "You're not fine. I've known you since Eisenhower. You're not fine." "I'm going to bed." I did not go to bed. I went down the hall to the back room, the one with the workbench and the file cabinets, I sat down. I opened the laptop Dot got me for Christmas 3 years ago that I'd barely used. and I started making a list. 23 accounts with my name on them, paying out every single month to my 2 grown children and 1 grown son-in-law. Some of them $90, some of them $2,000. Cell phones, insurance premiums, 2 storage units, a gym, a wine club. Streaming services I had never in my life watched a single minute of. A wellness subscription of Renee's that cost $340 a month, and I still don't know what it does. And underneath those, worse than those 9 loans with my signature on them as guarantor. Marcus's Tahoe, Marcus's boat, his business line of credit, Renee and Tyler's mortgage, their second vehicle, Tyler's equipment loan from a landscaping venture that lasted 4 months in 2021. 9 signatures, 23 accounts. I want to explain something to you, because when I tell this story, people always ask me the same thing. How does a grown man end up paying 23 bills for 3 adults? You don't decide to. Nobody decides to. You add 1 phone line when your boy turns 16 because you want him to be able to call you if the roads are bad. Then it's an insurance premium, just till he's out of school. Then it's just till the job starts. Then it's just this once. And then it's 31 years later and you are the reason 3 adults have electricity, and not one of them has any idea, because the money moves on the 5th of the month while everybody's asleep and nobody ever has to look at it. I started with the smallest one, a $9 a month cloud storage account of Tyler's. And then I just kept going. Stay with me now. Because what happened between that November night and the first week of March, nobody under my roof was ready for, least of all me. It started with a phone call I didn't make. Marcus was hosting an open house on the 2nd Saturday of November. Big place out on the North Shore, granite counters, the whole business. He had it staged. He had the little cards printed. He had 11 people walking through it at 2 in the afternoon. And that's when the loan officer from his bank called his cell phone to inform him that the guarantor on his commercial line of credit had formally withdrawn, effective immediately, and the line was being called for review. He took that call standing in somebody else's kitchen with clients 4 feet away. He called me 11 minutes later. I let it ring twice. Dad. Afternoon, son. Dad, what did you do? His voice was doing that thing where a man is trying to keep the lid on and the lid is coming up anyway. What? Who do? The bank called me. At work. In front of people, Dad. They said you pulled off my line of credit. That's right. Silence. About 4 seconds of it, and it sounded expensive. Why? Why would you do that without telling me? I'm cutting back, Marcus. Nothing. You told me to. I told you to stop buying a camper. You told me I was careless with money that wasn't only mine. So I went home and I looked at where the money goes. I kept my voice exactly the way it was. Room temperature, all the way through. You'd be surprised where it goes, son. Dad, that line of credit is how I make payroll on my assistant. That's my business. That's right. It's your business. I said good afternoon and I hung up and I went out and cleaned the snow off the trailer with a broom, and I'll tell you the truth, I whistled while I did it. Renee took longer to put it together. She's sharper than her brother in some ways, but she's also better at telling herself stories. When her gym card got declined at the front desk, she assumed it was the machine. When the wellness subscription bounced, she assumed it was the card. When the storage facility in Proctor called about a past due balance, she assumed somebody had made an error, because errors happen to other people, not to her. Then, the 3rd week of November, on a Wednesday, the streaming shut off in the middle of something she was watching. All of it. Every service, inside about 90 minutes. She drove up the hill that night. It was 17 degrees and blowing. She stood in my driveway in a coat that cost more than my first car, and she did not come inside. Dad, what is happening? You'll have to be specific. Everything's shutting off. Everything. Tyler's phone won't do anything. My storage unit called. The mortgage company sent us something about the guarantee. Uh-huh. Dad. Her breath was coming out white in the porch light. What is going on? I stood in my own doorway in my slippers, and I looked at my daughter. You told me I was being careless. You were right. So I sat down and I counted, and I found 23 separate places my money's been going every month for years, and I turned them off. All of them. I'm being careful now, sweetheart. Just like you asked. She stared at me. Those were ours. No, honey, I said. Those were mine. That's the whole misunderstanding. I told her to drive careful on the hill, and I shut the door. Now I have to tell you about Dot, because for about 5 weeks my wife did not speak to me except about groceries. She wasn't cold. Dot's never been cold a day in her life. She was grieving. She'd come into a room and sit down across from me and start to say something, and then stop and go do dishes that were already clean. She finally broke on a Friday night in December. She sat down at the kitchen table and folded her hands and looked at me with those eyes that have been reading me since 1976. Ray, please. Dot. Marcus had to let his assistant go. Renee called me crying this morning. They can't cover the second car payment. And Tyler doesn't work, Dot. Ray. He's 28 years old, and he has never once worked through a winter. Say it out loud with me. It's not cruel if it's just true. She looked at her hands. They're our children. They're adults. They didn't mean it the way you took it. And I leaned forward and I said, then tell me how they meant it. Because I've been turning it over since November and I keep landing in the same spot. Renee said we're going to end up with nothing. Marcus said I was burning it. Not spending. Burning. Like a man setting fire to something that belonged to somebody else. I put my hand flat on the table. 41 years of work. Dot. 1. Trailer. 1. And they sat in our front room and made me feel like a thief in my own house. She didn't answer that. She got up and went to bed. And I sat in that kitchen and I thought, well, Ray, you've won the argument and lost your wife, congratulations. But here's where it turned, friends. And I've never told this part to anybody outside my family. 2 days before Christmas, Dot went to Renee's to drop off presents. She let herself in the side door the way she always has, and she was standing in the mud room taking her boots off, and she heard Renee and Tyler in the kitchen. They were talking about the house, my house, the gray one with the red door. Renee was saying that when I went, the house would need to be sold fast, and that the problem would be Mom, because Mom would want to stay in it, and Mom would have to be handled. That was the word. Handled. And Tyler said something about how she probably wouldn't last long after anyway, and they both laughed, and then they talked about whether the property would appraise better with the trailer gone. My wife put her boots back on. She set the presents on the washing machine. She walked out and drove 22 minutes home, and she came in the door, and she stood in the front room with her coat still on and her keys still in her hand. Ray, she said, finish it. Dot. I said finish it. Her chin was going. And Ray, whatever you were going to do, do more. That was the last time my wife ever asked me to stop. If you've made it this far with me, friends, do me the kindness of hitting that like button and telling me down in the comments where you're listening from. It means more than you know. Now, let me tell you about March. I picked a Sunday. Sunday's the day nobody has a meeting to hide behind. I called them both Saturday night. Come to dinner, 1 o'clock. Don't be late. Marcus said, is everything okay? I said, everything's clear, 1 o'clock. Then I went down the hall and opened the bottom drawer of the file cabinet, the one that locks, and I took out the folder I'd been building since November. 31 years of statements. Every account, every loan, every transfer. Printed clean, sorted by year, by category, by name. 162 pages. I sat with it in my lap for a while. Then I went to bed and slept like a man who's finished a job right. They came at 10 till 1. Marcus and Renee and Tyler. They sat in the car in my driveway for 3 minutes before anybody got out, getting their story lined up. Dot made a beef roast with carrots and those little potatoes and rolls, and the house smelled like every good Sunday of the last 31 years, like nothing on earth was wrong. We ate first. I insisted on it. Renee tried twice to steer the conversation toward the trust her friend had mentioned, and twice I turned it. I asked Marcus about the market. I asked Tyler what he was doing these days, and I watched him work very hard to make 4 months of nothing sound like a career. I complimented my wife on the roast. I let them get comfortable. When the plates were cleared, I stood up and said, let's sit in the front room. Same room as November. Same chairs. Different weather entirely. I went and got the folder and set it on the coffee table and didn't open it. I want to talk about what you said to me in this room in November. Marcus shifted. Dad, listen. About that we came at it wrong. We didn't know the whole picture. No, you didn't. I nodded. And that's my fault. I never showed you. In 31 years, I never once sat you down and made it real. Because I thought that's what a good father does, he carries it quiet. I was wrong about that. I'm fixing it today. I opened the folder and turned it around and slid it across the table. Start at page 1. Marcus picked it up. Renee leaned in over his shoulder. I watched his eyes go left to right and then slow down and then stop. First column's the item. Second column's what it cost me every month. Third column's how many months. Fourth column, I tapped the table once, is what it came to. Nobody said one word. I let the paper do it. Paper doesn't get emotional. Paper doesn't raise its voice. Paper just lies there and tells you the truth in a straight line. He turned the page. Then another. Tuition. 2 weddings. 3 down payments. 19 months of rent in 2013 and 2014 when Marcus's first company folded and I never once mentioned it after. Braces. A DUI attorney in 2009 that Renee still doesn't know I know about. Storage units. Insurance. Phones. Vet bills. Furnaces. Tires. 140 other things that had moved out of my account and into their lives, like water out of a tap they never had to think about, because it was always just running. He got to the last page. He sat there. Dad. His voice came out with nothing in it. This says $1,340,000. $1,341 and change, I said, the way you'd read a gas gauge. Over 31 years. Give or take what I couldn't document. Renee's hand came up over her mouth. I leaned forward with my elbows on my knees, and I looked at the 3 of them. In November, you came into my house and told me I was careless. You told me I was burning money that wasn't only mine. You told me you'd end up with nothing. I let it sit. So I want to ask you one question, and I want you to actually think before you answer it. Nobody moved. Which part of that $1,340,000 was the careless part? Nothing. Not a sound in that house. Good. There's no answer. Because there isn't one. I sat back. I bought one thing for myself in 41 years of work. $61,000, cash, for a trailer so I could take your mother to see the ocean before one of us can't. And you sat in that chair, Renee, the same chair you've sat in since you were 9 years old, and you made me feel like I'd stolen it. Renee's eyes were bright and full, and not spilling yet. I want to be clear about something, I said. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing this because I love the 3 of you, and I have done you a serious disservice. I made your lives so soft you never once had to learn what soft costs. That's on me, so here's what happens now. I took out the second document. Cleaner. Shorter. My attorney in Duluth drew it up in January. I've moved everything into a living trust. The money's still there. It doesn't disappear. But it doesn't just land in a lap anymore, either. Marcus, the trustee, doesn't release $1 to you until you've held steady work and made your own payroll for 24 consecutive months. No guarantee, no cosigner, nobody's signature but yours. Renee, you and Tyler cover your own mortgage, in full, on your own income, for 18 consecutive months. Renee's head came up fast. Dad, we can't. On what we bring in, we can barely. I know you can't. I held her eyes. And that is exactly the thing I'm pointing at. That's not me being hard. That's me telling you something has been wrong for a long time, and my checkbook was never the fix for it. You're 34 years old. You're smart, and you've got taste, and you work hard when you want something. You have never in your life found out what you're actually capable of, because I kept getting there first. Her chin went. The tears came down one at a time, quiet. Marcus was staring at that trust document with his jaw locked. And the accounts, he said. The 23. Gone. For how long? For good. He looked up. The guarantees. All 9? Every one. 3.5 months ago. I looked right at him. And you made your Tahoe payment in December and January and February. Didn't you? He didn't answer. Didn't you, son? Yeah, real quiet. I did. Right. So you already know you can. That's the only thing I was ever trying to show you. The room went still again, and I honestly thought that we had come out the other side of it. Then Renee wiped her face with the back of her hand and said, Okay, Dad, we hear you, we do. But this isn't permanent, right? You're making a point. We get the point. It's permanent, Renee. The temperature in that room changed like a door had opened somewhere. Permanent, Marcus repeated. like it was a word in another language. He picked the trust up again and read it again and set it down hard on my coffee table. So you went to a lawyer. You restructured everything. You pulled 9 signatures and killed 23 accounts. And then you fed us a roast and handed us a document like we're employees. Lower your voice in my house. I will not. He was on his feet. Do you have any idea what these 4 months have been? I lost my assistant. I got a call from my bank standing in a client's kitchen. Dad, I had to borrow $800 from my wife's mother. I didn't know what was happening to my own finances. They were never your finances, Marcus. That's the entire lesson, and you're standing in the middle of it. Dead quiet. And then Renee stood up too, and I watched something come off her face. The soft went away. What was underneath it was harder than anything I saw in her as a child. You know what, Dad? Fine. You want to do it this way? Fine. She got her purse. But don't stand there and act like this is some gift you're giving us. You didn't do this to teach anybody anything. You did this because we hurt your feelings about a camper. Renee. Dot was on her feet now. A $61,000 camper, Mom. We were worried about him. You were worried about your inheritance, I said. And she flinched, because it landed, because it was true, and she knew it was true, and she couldn't get her hands around it to throw it back. And that made her angrier than any single thing I said all afternoon. We're leaving. Tyler, Marcus, let's go. Tyler was already at the door. Of course he was. Marcus stood there, still looking at me. And there was something behind his eyes that wasn't anger, something younger. Something that did not want to walk out of that room. But Renee was already moving, and my son has followed his sister since 1990. He picked up his keys off the shelf. He didn't look at his mother. He didn't look at the folder. He looked at me one time. I hope that ocean's worth it, Dad. The door didn't slam. He pulled it shut soft. A slam is a feeling. A door closed quiet is a decision. I sat there and listened to the Tahoe back down my driveway, and I listened to the street go quiet, and then I heard my wife. She was standing in the middle of the front room with her hands down at her sides, still in her good blouse, and she was crying. Not loud, just steady, the way a woman cries when she's been holding it since Christmas and the wall finally goes. Ray. I crossed the room and put both arms around her, and she held onto the back of my shirt with 2 fists. They walked out of my house, she said into my shoulder. I know it. Ray, what if they don't come back? I took her face in my hands. 48 years I've looked at that face. Every line in it I helped put there. The good ones, and the other kind. Then we'll have loved them all the way to the end anyway, I said. And that'll have to be enough. But I think one of them will. Now, here's the part people always want to know. And I'm going to tell you straight, because I don't believe in stories that tie up prettier than life does. 9 months went by. We left in April. We went down through South Dakota and sat in the Badlands at 7 in the morning with coffee, and Dot cried at the Tetons and wouldn't say why. We stood at Cannon Beach in Oregon on the 9th of May, and she took her shoes off and walked into water so cold it hurt, and she turned around and looked at me, and she was 70 years old and she was 19. Renee didn't call. Not in April, not in the summer. In August, she sent one text. It said, "Hope you two are well. Has anything changed with the trust?" I read it twice, and I put my phone in the console, and I drove. That's the truth of it. Some of them don't come back. And a man has to be able to live with that, or he was never really standing on anything. Marcus called in June. Just to talk. It was awkward as a first date. He called again in July. In September, he asked me a question about a boiler in a duplex he'd bought, asked me. Not for money, for what I knew, and we were on the phone an hour and 10 minutes. The first Saturday in November, 1 year and change from the day he told me I was burning money that wasn't mine, my son pulled into my driveway alone. He'd sold the boat. He'd sold the Tahoe and bought a work truck with 91,000 miles on it. He'd taken a job managing a property group that he told me, straight out, he thought was beneath him in January, and he'd held it 11 months. He stood in my kitchen and he put an envelope on the counter. That's $2,400, he said. That's not for the trust. That doesn't count toward anything. That's the first payment. Diama. On what? On 1.34 million, Dad. He rubbed the back of his neck. I did the math. At this rate, I'll have you paid back in about 460 years. And I laughed. First real one in 18 months. Son, I'm not going to take your money. I know you're not. I'm going to keep bringing it anyway. He stayed for supper. He thanked his mother for the apples, and there weren't even any apples, and Dot had to leave the room for a minute. I built every soft place my children ever landed on. I built them quiet, without a scoreboard, without ever once asking to be thanked for it. And here's what I learned at 71 years old. Friends, and I'd give a lot to have learned it at 40. Comfort you didn't build feels like weather to you. It's just there. Nobody did it. And when it stops, you don't feel poorer, you feel robbed. Because you never once in your life thought of it as a gift. I stopped being the weather. It cost me a daughter, at least for now, and I don't pretend that doesn't sit on my chest at 4 in the morning some nights. But last week, Dot spread that same road atlas out on this kitchen counter, the 1989 one. She never threw it out, and she got the yellow highlighter, and she drew a line down through Arizona toward the Gulf. And she looked up at me and she said, "Ray, we're going in February, and this time I'm not writing someday on it." That's my wife. If this one hit you somewhere, do me the favor, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me down in the comments where in the world you're listening from tonight. I'll see you on the next one.